The Yugoslav government-in-exile was an official government of Yugoslavia, headed by King Peter II. It evacuated from Belgrade in April 1941, after the Axis invasion of the country, and went first to Greece, then to Palestine, then to Egypt and finally, in June 1941, to the United Kingdom. History. Bearing in mind the worsening of the international situation, Regent Pavle Karađorđević, Prime Minister Dragiša Cvetković, and Vlatko Maček, leader of the Croatian Peasant Party, which was the main opposition party, reached an agreement for which to end nationalist disputes and strengthen the country. The agreement foresaw the creation of a new Croatian ban with an autonomous Croatian government, the dissolution of the National Assembly and hold new free elections. Although the National Assembly dissolved, the elections were not held and an agreement was revived under the authority of the Crown, which was in line with the constitution adopted during the royal dictatorship in 1931. British support for proposed future changes of the Yugoslav border at Italy's expense in a future peace conference after the war, in an attempt to prevent the convergence of Germany and Yugoslavia, but failed to prevent the rapprochement between the two countries. Even then, in the spring of 1939, Yugoslavia had transferred much of its gold into the United Kingdom and the United States, contrary to its declared neutrality and the dissatisfaction of Berlin. After the Yugoslav government signed the Tripartite Pact the 25th of March 1941 in Vienna, a day later in a coup almost without bloodshed, a group of aviation officers overthrew the government, expelled Regent Paul and prematurely declared an adult King Peter II, 6 months before his 18th birthday. Maček, considering that the motives of the coup were hostile to the agreement, conditioned its joining the new government of General Dusan Simović, confirming the validity of the agreement. Almost all the new Yugoslav parties were extremist. With regard to the diversity of political views of the parties that formed the new government, it failed to address the issues. A large government was formed in order to give each party equal importance, since it was formed without elections. The diversity of the parties prevented the government to adopt a common program. The new cabinet had not had time to modify existing laws and had to base their actions on the Constitution of 1931, which was adopted during the dictatorship. Simović tried to appease Hitler's rage, stating their intention to comply with all the obligations it has assumed Yugoslavia before the coup, including the accession to the Tripartite Pact. However, German leaders ignored the guarantee of the new government, which is openly sympathetic to the Allies, and ordered that immediately organizes an invasion of Yugoslavia. In the night between the 5th and the 6th of April, the Wehrmacht began the invasion, while the German Air Force bombed Belgrade. Poor armed and led Yugoslav army was quickly defeated. In Zagreb on April 10, the Axis declared the independent state of Croatia. Belgrade fell on April 12, and the remnants of the Yugoslav armed forces capitulated on April 17 and 18. The king and the remains of government went into exile between the 14th and 16th of April, on Churchill's disappointment, who wanted to rule the king stay home and to continue to provide resistance to the Axis powers. A lack of consensus among the parties that were formed would eventually be accentuated and weakened it. The Kingdom of Yugoslavia was soon divided by the Axis into several entities. Germany, Italy, Hungary, and Bulgaria annexed some border areas outright. A Greater Germany was expanded to include most of Slovenia. Italy added the governorship of Dalmatia and more than a third of western Slovenia to the Italian Empire. An expanded Croatia was recognized by the Axis as the independent state of Croatia. On paper, the NDH was a kingdom, and the 4th Duke of Aosta was crowned as King Tomislav II of Croatia. The rump Serbian territory became a military administration of Germany run by military governors, with a Serb civil government led by Milan Nedic. Nedic attempted to gain German recognition of Serbia as a successor state to Yugoslavia and claimed King Peter II as Serbia's monarch. Puppet states were also set up in Montenegro and southern Yugoslavia. Hungary occupied several northern regions. King Peter II, who had escaped into exile, was still recognized as king of the whole state of Yugoslavia by the Allies. Starting on 13 May 1941, the largely Serbian Yugoslav Army of the Fatherland resisted the Axis occupation of Yugoslavia. This anti-German and anti-communist resistance movement was commanded by Royalist General Draza Mihailovic. For a long time, the Setniks were supported by the British, the United States, and the Yugoslavian royal government in exile of King Peter II. However, over the course of the war, effective power changed to the hands of Josip Broz Tito's communist partisans. In 1943, Tito proclaimed the creation of the Democratic Federative Yugoslavia. The Allies gradually recognized Tito's forces as the stronger opposition to the German occupation. They began to send most of their aid to Tito's partisans, rather than to the royalist Setniks. On 16 June 1944, the Tito-Subasic Agreement was signed, merging the de facto and de jure governments of Yugoslavia. During his exile, King Peter II was educated at Cambridge University, served in the Royal Air Force and married Princess Alexandra of Greece and Denmark, who was the only child of the late King Alexander I of Greece and Princess Aspasia of Greece and Denmark. Armed forces. In exile, the Royal Yugoslav forces were initially under the command of General Bogo Ljubilic as Minister of the Army, Navy and Air Force and Chief of the General Staff, and General Borivoje Mirkovic as Commander of the Air Force. There were initially about 1,000 men in these forces in Cairo. On 12 January 1942, the king dismissed the Prime Minister Ilic and Mirkovic, provoking a mutiny by officers supportive of the Air Force General. The king then appointed Colonel Dragoljub Mihailovic, leader of the Setniks in Yugoslavia, as Minister and Chief of Staff to replace Ilic in absentia. He then appointed General Peter Zivkovic to act as Mihailovic's deputy in London and Cairo. Mihailovic was dismissed in August 1944 as Allied support shifted away from the Setniks. On 7 March 1945, the king dissolved the government and disbanded the armed forces, proclaiming Tito's partisans on the ground to be the sole legitimate government and military. The first unit of the Royal Yugoslav Army to be formed in exile was the 1st Battalion, Royal Yugoslav Guards, under Major Zevan Nizovic. It comprised a headquarters and 4 rifle companies. Of its original complement of 505 men, 411 were Slovenes who had been conscripted into the Royal Italian Army and subsequently captured by the British. In January 1942, command of this unit passed to Lieutenant Colonel Milo Jedinek, and on 19 February to Lt. Colonel Milan Prosen, after Dinek was implicated in the Pro-Mirkovic mutiny. In late February, the unit was ordered to relieve the Czechoslovak contingent at the Siege of Tobruk, but was diverted to join the 11th Brigade, 4th Division in Libya. In April, it retreated to Hafar Pass and then to Masor Matruh. In July, it was reassigned to the 9th Army in Mandatory Palestine to guard the oil refinery at Haifa. In January 1943, when Lt. Colonel Frank Stropnik assumed command, the battalion was 850 strong and well-trained. It was attached to the 25th Brigade, 10th Division. Before the end of the year, monarchist and communist factions had appeared in the ranks. Numbers dwindled, barely the size of a company. A rump unit was sent to the Italian theatre with its brigade in March 1944. It was disbanded soon after, despite the recruitment of 2,000 captured Slovene conscripts assembled in Algiers by Prozan. The British refused to ferry these men to Cairo, so they were assigned labor duties. After the fall of Yugoslavia, 105 personnel of the Royal Yugoslav Navy, under Commander Z.V. Adamik, joined the Mediterranean Fleet at Alexandria in Egypt. 2 motor torpedo boats, Dermata and Kashmir-Cullen, and a submarine, Nebojsa, ran the gauntlet of the Adriatic, evading the Italian Navy, and arrived in Suda Bay on 22–23 April before proceeding to Alexandria. The MTBs participated in the Syria and Lebanon campaign, while Nebojsa undertook training exercises. 10 floatplanes of the Naval Air Force also escaped. On the 3rd of June 1941, 8 Dornier 22 kj and 2 Rogoszewski Sim XIVH formed the 2 Squadron of the No. 230 Squadron Raf, based in Abu Qir. They participated in the Battle of Crete and patrolled the African coast until the unit was disbanded on 23 April 1942. In late 1943, Commander J. Saxida was given command of a torpedo boat flotilla based in Malta, which included some former Yugoslav MTBs that had been captured by Italy in 1941 and then surrendered to the Allies after Italy's armistice, as well as 3 minelayers, Malinge, Miljet and Villa. The Yugoslav Navy was also operating 8 former American PT boats, and after the 11th of January 1944, the ex-HMS Ballo, out of Livorno in Italy. In March 1945, all Royal Yugoslav vessels assembled at Ancona in preparation for the handover to Tito's forces, which occurred in August. The negotiations for the transfer of the vessels under British command took place on Vis. The royal representative was Captain Ivan Kern, whom Tito later promoted to Rear Admiral. The 11 aircraft of the Royal Yugoslav Air Force to make it to Alexandria were requisitioned by the British. Several Savoir Marchetti M79s piloted by Yugoslavs joined No. 117 Squadron RAF and flew transport missions along the Takorada air route. On the 2nd of July 1942, the interned Yugoslav Air Force personnel and guards in Alexandria were formed into the 244 Temporary Battalion of the King's Own Royal Regiment. But after a pro-Tito mutiny in November 1943, the unit was disbanded. Its personnel were transferred to the diminished Royal Guards, while 224 of the Air Force men joined the Balkan Air Force in Libya, joined by partisan volunteers. These men formed No. 352 Squadron RAF on the 22nd of April 1944 and No. 352 Squadron on the 1st of July. They mainly flew Hawker Hurricanes and Supermarine Spitfires in operations over Yugoslavia in support of the partisans. Both squadrons were disbanded on the 15th of June 1945. Prime Ministers. Sub-Basic Cabinet. Ivan Sub-Basic took office on the 1st of June 1944. He was appointed to negotiate with Tito because of his special position in the Croatian Peasant Party, his loyalty to the Karađorđević dynasty, his moderation in comparison with other Croatian politicians, and his experience in difficult situations. Nevertheless, his nomination after months of British pressure on the king depended on the elimination of Mihailović from the cabinet. 10 days after his nomination, Sub-Basic fled to the island of Vis in the Adriatic Sea in order to meet with Tito and try to form a coalition coalition government. Tito agreed to postpone a decision on the form of government until the end of the war, and Subasic, for his part, recognized that only the partisan administration of the Yugoslav territory would receive support. He also promised that the government would include only people who had not previously opposed Tito and his organization, and that it would concentrate on securing international support. The agreement was signed on the 16th of June with no consultation by Subasic, even with the king. After his return, Subasic formed a government of 5 ministers, with 2 of them proposed by Tito. Mihailović lost his position as war minister. He refused to recognize the new government and continued to proclaim his loyalty to the king. On the 12th of September, the king went on the radio to ask people to support Tito. Subasic met with Tito in Belgrade on the 1st of November. Under their agreement, the king was not authorized to return to the country until a plebiscite was held about the monarchy. After Subasic returned to London, the king rejected the agreement and replaced Subasic on the 23rd of January 1945. But under British pressure, the king was compelled to call him back 6 days later and to accept the principle of a regency. 2 weeks later, Subasic and his ministers went to Belgrade. A new coalition government was formed on the 7th of March, in which Tito controlled 20 ministers of 28. This ended the government in exile. Bibliography. KMA. The Yugoslav government in exile and the problems of restoration. East European Quarterly 25, 1-19. Pavlovich, Stephen K. Out of Context, The Yugoslav Government in London, 1941-1945. Journal of Contemporary History 16, 89-118. DOI 10.1177/002200948101600106. Pavlovich, Stephen K. The Foreign Office, King Peter and His Official Visit to Washington. East European Quarterly 16, 453-66. Pavlovich, Stephen K. Mom Siloninsik and the European Policy of the Yugoslav Government in Exile, 1941-1943. I. The Slavonic and East European Review 62, 400-20. Pavlovich, Stephen K. Mom Siloninsik and the European Policy of the Yugoslav Government in Exile, 1941-1943. 2. The Slavonic and East European Review 62, 531-51. Yapao Eliezer, Yugoslavia, Between Setniks and Partisans. Governments in Exile, 1939-1945. Jerusalem.